Okay, Ed, Natasha, it'd be awesome to get started with a little bit of your journeys into the world of veganism. I don't mind who goes first. Or maybe they work together, I don't know. But
ladies
feel free.
It's probably better I go first because I went vegan first. So I actually kind of became vegetarian at the age of 7. I didn't like meat. I was forced to eat meat as a young child, and I had a very old school upbringing. So like my mother wouldn't let me get down from the table until every mouthful was done. And what that meant was like me chewing on like bits of chicken or whatever for like hours, just and then I would just have to go to bed. There would be no time for playtime. And then I think by the age of 7, my mum was done with that and just realised that I didn't like meat. I didn't want to eat meat, and it was just painful for everyone to sort of force me to eat meat. So after that, I didn't eat any meat. And then people told me, "Oh, you're vegetarian," and gave me that label. Which was a blessing and a curse because, as you know, with labels like vegan or vegetarian, people make judgments and they put you into a classification. And then there's also a kind of model of perfection that you're expected to live up to all times. So I did adopt that label, but I remember growing up and going to friends' houses and parents feeding me and me saying, "Oh, I don't eat meat," or "I'm vegetarian." And I remember like a lot of the dads in England would be like, "Oh, get some meat in you, meat and potatoes, that's all what it's all about," kind of thing. And, I just kind of tolerated it, but I didn't like meat, so no one was going to make me eat meat, but ate lots of dairy. Never liked eggs either, unless they were like baked in a cake and I didn't notice them. Never ate eggs. Wasn't really a fan of fish or seafood. Didn't really actually have much exposure to that. I grew up quite poor, and seafood is other than sort of fish fingers, it was a bit more of a, I don't know, like shellfish and stuff is a bit fancy. So eventually years later I met Ed, and he was a fine dining chef and had quite a holistic approach to like using all these the whole animal. Nothing can be wasted. Source it as ethically and nicely as you can, whatever that means. And that was his philosophy at the time. And we sort of lived together with a heavy vegetarian diet, but a little bit more seafood, and sometimes chicken was introduced to my diet in my 20s. And I never really felt that comfortable with it. It was kind of the only thing I would eat if I was in a restaurant, there was no vegetarian option, or I was at somebody's house and trying to accommodate them and please them, and not wanting to be a difficult guest. But when we moved to Canada 10 years ago, I got a job in a ski school kitchen, serving 800 ski instructors and kids lunch every day. And I was the first cook. I don't know how I got this job. I didn't really go for this job. I just sort of got a job with the ski school support staff, and they gave me this role because I had food and beverage experience. And before I knew it, it was the first time in my life I had to cook meat for like kids and other people. And I was like reading all the packets. Like they have these things over in Canada called like wieners, and they're like disgusting processed sausages that actually were only 40% reconstituted pork, whatever that means. And the rest of it, we don't even know what that is really. So really awful, disgusting food. I didn't like serving it. And there was this juice bar at the bottom of the mountain that had just opened. It was basically a vegan raw food juice bar. And I kind of went there every day when I came off the gondola and went and got a smoothie and a juice. And all the girls that worked there were like these super healthy, vibrant babes. And everyone at ski school was like getting fat and spotty and depressed and eating crap food and drinking and partying all the time. And I just saw these two different like lifestyle choices. And I decided after ski school that I would work at the juice bar. And so I became basically a raw vegan chef and didn't know anything about raw vegan food. Went raw vegan at first, did that for a long time. But the problem with that, when you go from like vegetarian to raw vegan, is your body can react quite suddenly to sort of the detox, if you like. And so eventually I started to eat more cooked foods and then became an all-rounded vegan. And then told Ed that I didn't want any animal products in the house, and if he wanted to live with me or continue living with me, he would have to accept that, which was a bit of a shock. But he was a chef, and coming home very late, he would just be happy to eat whatever was like cooked and ready to eat. So he kind of got on board with vegan at home. But then I'll let you take over.
Yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed, like Tash said, I've always worked in fine dining restaurants in the UK when we lived in Australia. So I've always been like into any sort of cooking, but especially sort of using plants and vegetables and herbs anyway. So I was always quite open to it. And like she said, before that, we always ate a very heavy vegetarian diet anyway. So it wasn't a huge shock. Like some people were like, well, how did you do it? It seems quite extreme when she said, I'm going vegan. But I was like, okay, that's fine with me. I worked in a sort of farm to table restaurant here in Whistler. And then it was just from there, it just grows. The more you know, the more you sort of educate yourself. It was that sort of 2015, 2016, a lot of documentaries coming out, you know, and we were taking more and more of an interest in not just a plant-based diet, but the whole vegan as a sort of culture, the people, the lifestyle, everything like that. And it did spark my interest because as a chef, like I said, I always say to some people like dairy, it really sort of coats your sort of your whole mouth and your taste buds, and all you can actually taste is that sort of like cream. Whereas, for example, if you use like cashews and nuts and things like that to make the similar texture or cream or milk, you can introduce so many other flavors. And then for me, I had a heart condition, which I've had all my life. Like I had a heart murmur. I've had a stent fitted when I was 26. So, you know, we all know that dairy is not good for any sort of cardiovascular sort of issues anyway, sort of high blood pressure, things like that. So I was kind of open it from that point of view as well. I'd been on medication in the UK and living in the mountains, being more active. I was already like doing yoga and living a healthier lifestyle. So I was quite open to it, and it had amazing effect on my mental health. Physically, I was able to sort of, you know, do more. So like Tash said, I sort of came to veganism 2 years after her, like actually coming out and saying, yeah, I'm living a vegan lifestyle. But we've never looked back since then, you know, since 2015, 2016, something like that. I don't have an exact date.
It was 2014 for me. And then, yeah, I basically dragged Ed to like vegan potlucks, like a party where you bring a dish. And I remember hearing like one vegan guy or something ask Ed on the other side of the room if he was vegan, and Ed said yes. And I remember I nearly like fell over. I was like, what? He's vegan? Like, cool, I finally got him.
You could finally commit to the label. I love
yes.
it.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, like if your partner's not vegan, it's okay. Just keep feeding them and showing them documentaries. And then eventually I think they will. Well, Ed did, you know, cross over, and from a fine dining background where they're like super proud to like, you know, butcher every part of the animal, which makes Ed feel quite queasy now to think that he participated in that. But back then, you know, that was seen as like the best thing you could do. That was their kind of, you know, philosophy on it. So to come from that background and then go vegan is quite stark contrast, I think.
Yeah, like I was talking about this with somebody on the show a couple of weeks back about a chef I knew who was really into like Anthony Bourdain and gave me this book and stuff, and was and I just couldn't read it. I got like a chapter in, and I was just like, this is like, it was the sheer like relish of like, I'm like real enjoyment of like, I want to eat everything, like as like, you know, the most squeamish, like visceral body parts. Like it was almost the delight in how obscure you could get in eating whatever's, you know, gizzards or something. You know, it was just really almost like it's a culture, right? Like it's something that's really kind of deeply ingrained in that culture of like, and I guess like there is some kind of, although we would obviously disagree with it now, but there's an ethical philosophy in there somewhere which is about wastage and stuff, I guess, but not the one that we concur with now. But I kind of, I don't know, it sounds weird, but I probably have more understanding of that philosophy now, being vegan, than I did when I was on omnivore, because it just seemed a bit gross. Now it's like, I disagree with it fundamentally, but I can kind of see the logic to it. I don't want to do it and I don't like it, but I kind of see the logic. Thinking about that, Ed, you know, when you kind of made this transition, how long was it before you kind of distanced yourself from working in that kind of environment? Did that take a while? Because I would imagine that's quite difficult to like extricate yourself from something you've given so much of your life and talents to.
Totally. Yeah, it's a good question, Jim, because you're right. It's like I couldn't just step out of, I was in a senior position in a kitchen. I was a sous chef, so I was assisting the head chef when he wasn't there. So a lot of the time I was running the kitchen, doing all the ordering and preparing the foods. But he was very respectful. He's a very good friend of mine. And he has friends that are vegan. I think his uncle was vegan. So he kind of could see the path that I was on. I just introduced as many vegan options as I could to that restaurant, and any sides or any garnish that were going with dishes. But I wasn't actually eating stuff. So I had that mentality that, okay, I'm not eating this steak or whatever it was, but I'm going to cook it the best I can, and would really be on the other chefs to be respectful and do the best that they could. To a point where I actually cooked for my head chef's wife's 40th birthday. They wanted like a Moroccan banquet, and I made the whole banquet or dinner for 12 people at the restaurant, all vegan, except for there was some lamb or something like that. I can't remember. And I cooked it, but because I'd been a chef for over 20 years, I didn't need to eat it. I didn't need to eat the sauce. I got the other chefs to taste it just to make sure that it was good. But I remember like going out there and the guests were blown away because it was all vegan except for the main sort of meat item. And they were just sort of like, well, you really know what you're doing. But that was really sort of, I remember that being a pinnacle moment that we'd already started BReD, the bakery that we own now, as a sort of side hustle. So I was running that from the restaurant. So I was renting the kitchen on Wednesday mornings, making all the sourdough, and then the customers would come in Thursday morning to pick it up. And the restaurant were very supportive of that. So I'd already started that business and had customers saying, you know, you should be opening a bakery. So in our mind, we'd already started thinking, okay, this is our transition. This is our way out. So I think that spurred me on. I had the support of the restaurant with me starting this small business, and I was going vegan. So it was all sourdough then, just one bread a week that people would order through Facebook. But it was definitely a transition out because there aren't any vegan restaurants here. There's a couple of juice sort of smoothie bars. But I knew I didn't want to work there. I wasn't going to go from fine dining to work, you know, making salads and things. It's just not my passion.
I think you just focused on the bread because that aspect of the restaurant menu was vegan. So by Ed just owning the bread program, that gave him kind of like a little vegan corner in a non-vegan kitchen that he could kind of focus on.
Yeah, and we did vegan events. Like I said, like that restaurant was as supportive as they could be, you know, without making that total leap. But I'd say at the best point, 50% of the menu was vegan. Wow. So I sort of put my, you know, print on it, my stamp on it, and then eventually we moved away and we opened the bakery. So it was about a year and a half, I think, of saying I'm vegan to being able to leave that restaurant and open the bakery.
That's very cool. I want to really get into BReD and the kind of the whole journey with the bakery. Before I do though, I've got a question for you, Natasha. I want to go right back because it's sort of something popped into my mind just as you were talking about your sort of story. I was thinking, like, you know, for a 7-year-old who's kind of decided somewhere that they don't know what vegetarian is, but there's something they're uncomfortable with here. Did you know what that was? Was it an animal welfare thing? Was it an ethical thing? Was it, you know, where did it come from? Was it texture? Like, what was that little feeling that was nagging away at you?
I think it was initially the texture, and then realizing that texture was the flesh of like mammals and beings, sentient beings. And I just think it's absolutely disgusting, even like more so now, to that people go around eating like dead bodies. Like I know plants are kind of dead when we cut them and eat them, but I just think like all the pus, all the organs, diseases, viruses, like they don't really exist in plants. Like plants are kind of like mainly like water and vitamins and nutrients in my mind anyway. And then for animals, it's like, I was just hearing the other day that like a lot of cows have leukemia, and you see in these awful like exposure videos of factory farms that vegans are quite not happy to watch, but we watch them because we like to be reminded why we're vegan and why we're doing what we're doing. But obviously a lot of non-vegans can't quite, it's a bit too much for them to take in because it might make them change their mind about their food choices, and they don't really want to do that. But those sort of, you see a lot of videos of animals with tumors and things. And I just think when we're slicing through the flesh, like we don't really know what we're eating. Like we don't know what that animal, like even if people say it was organic, it was free range, it was ethically slaughtered, it's like, but it could have still had tumors and diseases. And we know that because there's outbreaks of bird flu all over the world all the time. You just have to Google bird flu and go to the news section on Google, and you'll find within the last week or so somewhere they've had a bird flu outbreak. So all those diseases and viruses, like they don't come from plants. Plants are the medicine. So for me, I want to eat that. I want to eat the clean medicine that's going to cure, rather than the stuff that's contaminated. And we know from like food safety that meat and dairy and eggs, anything from an animal, is high risk and has to be kept at certain temperatures. Whereas plants, you can still get into trouble, some contamination, but it's a lot less. The risk is much, much more reduced by eating plants. So I definitely think that as a kid, it was something, there was a connection there, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I just knew that the flesh was not a good thing to be putting my teeth into. So, I think it was subtle, but it started with texture. And then I kind of got to understand more about what the texture was.
Imagine like harboring that for such a period of time, that kind of like internal nagging, but not knowing what it was or how to, what to label it as or how to best navigate that. I'd imagine, was there almost a sense of relief then when you kind of discovered what veganism was and that there was a way to live without that?
Yeah, so actually to go really deep into it, I grew up partially in foster care and moved around a lot. And I had to see like a child psychologist because what I'd been through was quite traumatic. And so the social services decided that I probably had some sort of psychological trauma and needed to see a psychiatrist. So once a week I was taken out of school and had to go see this woman. And they really couldn't find any strange behaviours or anything that they could say like, oh yeah, this is the trauma, this is what's wrong with her, except the fact that they decided I was a fussy eater. That's how they interpreted me not wanting to eat meat. And they actually said that was how my trauma was manifested. It was in my food choices, which I found as an adult looking back, I find that quite interesting, that like me not wanting to eat like animals, like dead animals, that was seen as like mad, basically, that I wasn't conforming to their ideas of normal family life. And so that was how I was manifesting my trauma. And I hated seeing this psychiatrist. And the first time I went, I cried. And I remember this woman said, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" And from then on, I had to go to her. I was forced to go see her, but she had like these tubs of plasticine. And I don't know if they do it now because I don't know much about psychology and psychiatrists and things. But back then they would often put like certain toys in the room and then try and analyze how the child was playing. So I guess if there were two dolls and you started beating them together, then they would say, oh, well, obviously they've seen, domestic abuse at home. But for me, I just sat there, got the Play-Doh and just made pigs out of plasticine. And that's my memory of going to the psychiatrist. I wouldn't talk to her and I just made plasticine pigs. And I wonder if that was also me sort of connecting with like, no, I don't want to eat animals. Like I love animals and here's some animals, So it was a very strange upbringing in the 90s, like that's mainly when I grew up in foster care, and there weren't vegans around. Like nobody really knew what vegan meant, and I was just kind of seen as fussy and strange. But I just got on with it because I was a kid in foster care. I was already a bit strange compared to other kids anyway, because most kids lived with their families, and went on like nice holidays and had a very different upbringing to me. So it was just another thing that was a little bit strange about me that I just had to get on with.
Yeah, you'd hope that that's changed now. Hopefully it's a bit more open.
You'd hope so.
Yeah, I
hope there's not kids getting labelled as fussy eaters.
Yeah,
for that.
I think veganism has definitely become a lot bigger. Like Tash said, in the 90s, it was still sort of a bit unknown. Like, I mean, people have been vegan since the 50s or 60s. It came around.
There've been, when I meet somebody that's been vegan for like 20 or 30 years, it's like, wow. Like, to meet somebody that's been vegan from birth is almost unheard of. So I do think that there were 1 in a million vegans back in the 90s, and it was more about vegetarianism. But thankfully that we've all learned a lot more. And also perhaps it's because the animal agriculture's got a lot worse. And so people are more shocked than ever. Maybe in the 90s, we still had this idea that cows were happy and, free. And now
that's how their grandparents have lived. I feel like a lot of people use that. Like, this is how my granddad's, 90 or 100 years old, and he's been eating meat all his life. But it's like, but for the first 50 years of his life, it was probably a lot different than what it is now, with all the chemicals and foods and things like that they feed them. So, I think sometimes people just use excuses. They say, "Oh, this is how I brought up, and I was fine, so I'm going to raise my kids like this on the same diet," but it's not the same diet.
So much has changed. Like even what they feed the animals now, like a lot of it's genetically modified food. And then they also feed, I know that they feed cows like fish byproduct that doesn't get fed to humans. And really cows don't eat fish in the wild. They're not fisher type animals. So we're feeding animals like the wrong types of food, and I think that's probably having some impact on their health. So many things have just got out of control and just got so weird. The medicine, the technology, all the antibiotics that we're giving the animals, it's night and day probably, like meat now compared to what it was 100 years ago. I'm sure it's quite different, all the hormones, and it's just terrible.
Yeah, must be, right? Must be. Like thinking about, let's turn to BReD. So obviously that you mentioned Ed, that came a year or so before you transitioned out of the restaurant, and it was kind of started as a side hustle and so on. Let's talk about the kind of the inspiration for it starting, and then kind of what it's grown into now. And was it always intended to be a kind of a vegan project?
No, so I mean, I've worked in kitchens since I was 13. Well, it's always vegan, but I worked in kitchens since I was 13 years old, grew up in Kent in the UK. We did some traveling and things. And then I remember the first time I made sourdough was in a restaurant in Bristol, in the UK, little place called Bell's Diner in Montpellier. Beautiful little bistro restaurant. And me and the head chef, Chris Wicks, we sort of like, again, he wanted to introduce more bread to the restaurant instead of just buying it from a bakery. We kind of just learned as we went along, used Richard Bertinet's books, who's a baker in Bath, amazing French baker. And that's where the passion really started. I was like, wow, this is super cool. This is like water, flour, salt, and that was probably 14 or 15 years ago, that I made my first sourdough. And from there, kind of was making it, moved around to another sort of fine dining 5-star restaurant in Bristol. We moved out here. I was working at the restaurant Alta Bistro, and we made everything there, but we weren't making the bread again. So I was like, let's introduce sourdough to that, and was making bread on my days off, giving it to friends, taking it to the yoga studio, and people were like, you should sell this. This is a really good product, and no one's doing anything like that here. So it was a gap in the market, and it was like, I enjoy making bread. People enjoy eating my sourdough. It's a healthier option. It's like lots of whole grain and fermented, so it's good for us to eat. And then it just grew from there. I approached the restaurant and said, look, we don't open for lunch, so the kitchen is just empty in the mornings. Like the chefs don't normally arrive till midday, 1 o'clock, and then we'd work, sort of prep the afternoon and do dinner service. So I said, can I rent the kitchen Wednesday morning, make the bread, goes in the fridge, I'll do my service, my prep job, and then come in early the Thursday morning and bake it. And it's nice fresh bread for the customers. There was it wasn't as easy as it sounds. It was 2 kitchens because the restaurant expanded. So 2 ovens, 2 different kitchens, a small mixer. So it started I remember the first week, it was like 30 loaves of bread through Facebook. I had a little brown book, took everyone's name and phone number, and was hoping that everyone would turn up because it was just done on trust. It wasn't prepaid. It was just cash, turn up, pay it. Do you want bread next week? Yeah, I'll write your name for the next week.
But you were worried at first. You were like, I hope I can sell 30 loaves of bread.
I'd never even made 30 loaves of bread. I'd made probably like a dozen at the most. I was like, how am I going to make this? It was like I could make about 15 max in this mixer. So I was like, right, it'll be 2 batches. I was like, right, get that down. Just do tin loaves, keep it simple. It was all the same bread. And then the next week I'd change it. So it was like market research. That's what it became. At first, it was just a side hustle because I wanted to buy a truck. I was like, I need some extra cash.
No, it wasn't. It was, you were just experimenting with different recipes, and you gave them to Tina, the yoga teacher, because you'd make one for us and then you'd have one extra. You'd bring it to the yoga studio. All the yogis would smell it and go, that smells really good. Can we get some of that bread? How do we get it? We'd buy that from you. And then you were like, okay, I'll try and maybe I could make a batch and sell it.
So in my mind, it was for the truck. It's like, yeah, you can just make it. I was like,
I don't want to cause a dispute.
And then what it actually became, it grew and grew, and it became 50. And then I was averaging about 150 loaves.
Then it was people you didn't even know coming. And
it was like this,
with the same mixer?
Same mixer.
Are you still on this?
Still.
Wow.
The hours just got longer.
So the hours got longer. I started earlier, became like 10 batches. So by the time I'd finished the last mix, it'd take me like 2 hours to do these 2.5 hours. I'd almost have to start shaping the first breads that I'd mixed.
Yeah.
But I managed to do it in about 5 or 6 hours in the morning. So I'd arrive at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, had to have all the kitchen cleaned and ready because the chefs had left the night before and it was all clean. So they didn't want to walk in and have flour and mess everywhere. They had to start prepping. So the deal was you can rent the kitchen, but when the chefs start their shift, it has to be like how they left it. So I'd have to do all my own dishes, clean the floor, mop the floor. So it was all perfect.
But then it got to 150 loaves a week. And then the restaurant owners were kind of starting to see that they were everyone thought Ed was the head chef. And they were all talking about him and the bread. And then, so now the restaurant had become more known as this underground bread club. The local paper did a feature on it. And at that point, they were like, right, this has to become part of the restaurant now. We're going to open up a sandwich shop. You can run it. It's going to be your project. And Ed's like, well, I'm vegan. So I only want to make vegan sandwiches. And they were like, yeah, vegan. Yeah. And then some ham and some cheese. And Ed's like, yeah, I don't think you quite get, I'm not making bread, put ham and cheese on it. So then the customers were starting to not be able to get bread because it was too full. We had to turn people away. And then they were like, when are you going to open your own shop? I don't want to wait once a week. And this is really inconvenient. You need to open a shop. And then eventually we were kind of okay, yeah, bakery. And then we're thinking, well, it's going to have to be vegan. But then they're all saying that they wanted to buy the bread. So we thought, well, I think we had their trust already that they liked the products that Ed was making. So it was okay, yeah, we'll open a bakery. And then secretly we're like, but it's going to be vegan. And so a lot of them didn't realise when we did open that it was vegan. And even now, someone said to me the other day, I feel like the veganism's secondary. I don't really notice it. And I kind of, at first I was a bit upset because for us, it's it's our reason to get up in the morning. We're on a mission, like vegan world, here we come. And then like other people on the outside are like, oh, I don't even notice it's vegan. And I'm like, well, maybe that's a good thing because it's inclusive then. It's subtle. And so they feel welcome. It's not a bakery specifically for vegans, because like, what's the point of that anyway? We don't want to get we don't need to preach to converted. We need to like nudge the other ones along the way. So
I love it. I think it's stealth veganizing. You know, I think that's the key in a way. Like, I think there's a place for everybody in every different form. There's a place for someone that's got, you know, we are a vegan restaurant written outside of it. I also think there's a huge place for folks who are just delivering amazing food that somebody says, oh, this is great, and then you drop it. Oh, it's vegan, by the way, and it sort of changes their whole perception of, oh, I thought vegan food was X or Y, and it turns out it's this. You know, like, it turns out I'd actually really enjoy it. Like, I love that concept, and I imagine that's probably happened to you numerous times, that conversation, since you've opened. Does it feel that way? Does it feel like you've kind of like stealth veganized your community?
Kind of like we do a lot of like testing and everything like that, and we won't put an item on the menu or sell an item until we're like really happy with it, that it tastes good, as good as like its counterpart. Like, we're not going to sell a product unless we're 100% behind it. And because of my chef background, I think about texture and presentation and flavor combinations, not making it too complicated, eating with the seasons. I'm huge into that. We support local farmers. So I feel like we have that extra edge as well, where I'm not professionally trained as a baker. I'm kind of self-taught, and it's a lot of experimentation, and some things work, some things don't, like always in baking, any type of baking. I mean, that was the thing, the realization. It's like, cool, I'm making sourdough. Okay, we're going to open a bakery now. We're going to sell our house in the UK and put all of our cards on the table. It's kind of scary. And then you're like, shit, I need to make cakes and cookies and stuff. Like, I don't really know how to do that stuff.
It started with BReD, but then it's like, when you decide to write a business plan, you have to like assess the market, the location, like what's going to work, what's not going to work. And the location we have is at the base of Whistler Mountain in a ski resort by a gondola. So think people going skiing every day, like they want coffee, and they want like hot drinks, and they want grab and go snacks. So then it's like, right, what are we going to do for like treats and stuff? It's like, okay, well, I guess we wanted to be sourdough, so I guess we'll do sourdough cinnamon buns. So that's something else that we've become known for, is our sourdough cinnamon.
This is making me hungry, this whole conversation.
Yeah, pretty Canadian, right? We're like, yeah, we'll put a maple glaze on top. Maple syrup. We've got loads of maple syrup on the menu. And
then we got complaints, didn't we, at first, because we were doing them like European style, but in North America, they all put like loads of cream cheese frosting all over it, because it's just like apparently not enough fat inside the cinnamon bun.
Oh, over the cinnamon bun.
Yeah. And like we get German customers or Europeans, and we're like, do you want the cream cheese frosting? And they're like, no, like, why would you do that? But you get an American or a Canadian, cheese frosting, they're like, hell yeah, who the hell would say that? And I'm like, well, you'd be surprised.
So is that like the sort of like, this is probably a bad word to professional bakers, but like the sort of Cinnabon looking things, you know, with all the icing on top?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's the kind of like the vision I have.
Yeah, like a carrot cake. The frosting you have on top of a carrot cake is that on top of a cinnamon bun. So we just sell it as a side that people can choose to add it or not.
I love it.
Just because there's such a divide there between the different tourists or locals that we have.
I think I'd be going for the European route, just without because they're quite sweet, right?
They are pretty sweet.
But Jim, we don't like to make anything too sweet, because we like the flavors of the grains or the spices or the fruit or whatever. We like that to come through.
Yeah.
And if you put too much sugar in, which a lot of bakeries do, because it's also a preservative, so you can keep your product longer, but we don't. We make everything in-house, bake fresh on the day, serve it still warm.
Nice.
And we don't do day-old stuff.
Plus you can eat more, so we can sell more. You don't want to get, when you get a headache, like you eat so much sugar, and you're like, oh man, I can't eat anymore. So the idea is that people...
It's sweet enough without giving you toothache.
Yeah. I love it. Love it. So we're getting into this process of like you learning how to become a kind of a chef who could make the full gamut of bakery products. How difficult was that, given like I'd imagine like your standards were up there from a fine dining point of view, but maybe like your skill level in this particular area wasn't quite up there yet, and that there was a disconnect, but it was there for the bread and so on. So what was that process like?
It was kind of good because when we opened the bakery, had a guy, Flynn, an Aussie baker with me who had worked in bakeries actually longer than me. So we were kind of sussing it out together. Like he was really open to sort of trying stuff, and he was like me. He had amazing work ethic. Like we both worked. I find that like I really bond with people that have worked in their early teens, because I feel like that's what we found since hiring people over the last 5 years, is that people generally that have worked from an early age have great work ethic. And I don't know, I'm just kind of, my standards are pretty high with cleanliness as well. Like our bakery's all open plan. So we get a lot of people coming in that want to look around, and that came from the early days starting in the restaurant, because mums or dads would come with their kids and they'd see the bread coming out the oven. So for me, I was always like, I want the kids to have a connection with their food, and that a lot of our items will never touch plastic. Like the flour comes in paper bags. We bake the bread and it goes back into a paper bag. So there's never any plastic involved, which I love. And we just try and use the best ingredients. We use organic Canadian flour. The water is obviously like local filtered water, and we use sea salt from Vancouver Island, which they actually filter for microplastic, because unfortunately now so much of our even salt from the sea has got plastic in it.
It has been a bit of a learning curve though. Like I remember when we first opened the bakery, construction took, as it always does, it was a big renovation because there was just a shell of a space, and we had to put gas, electric, water, everything into that to turn it into a bakery. And it was all focused on that, getting the construction ready and getting the doors open, that when it came to opening week and we actually had the bakery kitchen ready to use with the health and safety checks done and everything, we were like, okay, so what is the rest of the menu? Like, do we have a gluten-free thing? Do we have a nut-free? Do we have a this and a that? And we just kind of scrambled together a menu and just got the doors open. But then since then, we've spent a lot more time developing recipes. But when Penguin Random House reached out and said, you know, they'd heard about us and they wanted us to write a book that had at least 100 recipes, we were like, 100 recipes? Like, what are we how can we come up with that? Like, that's a bit, I think we sat down and eventually realized we had 50 recipes that we'd already implemented in the bakery. But then there was a lot of, like, as you can see behind us, we've got loads of cookbooks. Like, we're big kind of cooking people. So we just had to get out there researching, thinking, looking in books, and obviously lots of influencers online posting stuff, and we just had to get a bit creative and come up with the rest of them. Because
there's not much vegan baking out there, you know, compared to regular baking. It's kind of, you can kind of look at a recipe and veganize it, but that's not always as simple as it sounds, you know, because there's so many complexities to it. Like with eggs, you know, they're so complicated. It's like they have so many different properties. You can't just switch an egg out for anything. You have to sort of do development, look at what its purpose is within that recipe. So sometimes I'm like, not very often at all, to be honest, because I don't want to go down that route, and I never will. But like, I'm like, oh man, if we could just use eggs, this would be so easy. But to be honest, the way the food science is going, they're getting better and better with egg replacers anyway. It is becoming easier and easier. We just need more subsidies to kick in, you know, so they are more expensive a lot of the time.
Do you have a go-to on that front, or is it kind of by recipe when it comes to like egg replacement? Do you have like a go-to, or? I mean,
generally because so flaxseed, which you guys call linseed, we can get it. It's grown in Canada. It's organic. And we can just blend it to a powder. So we use like a linseed, flaxseed powder and mix that with like oat milk or soy milk. that's a really good binder for cookies and cakes. But we also use other things, like we'll use psyllium husk or chia seeds, or we'll go down the route of sort of something even more natural. Well, not more natural, but like fruits or starchy vegetables, things like that, or aquafaba from cooking chickpeas. Because during lockdown, we actually had a bunch of chickpeas. We used to do a chickpea hummus cookie, which is in the cookbook. It's really delicious. But we started doing more deli items because people, stores were running out of food. So we started making hummus and marinating olives and things like that. So we had the aquafaba, the cooking liquid from the chickpeas. So you can make like meringues with that and all sorts. So it kind of, as I'm talking about it, I'm like, it reignited my passion for food. Like I've always been passionate for food, but going vegan sort of was the next challenge for me. It was like, okay, so I know French cuisine. I've been doing it now for over 20 years. I haven't mastered it. No one ever will. But it kind of, I was heading towards sort of, my late 20s, early 30s. And I was like, I feel like this is what I needed. I needed a sort of new challenge.
I think I made Ed like a cashew cheesecake when I was like, because I was the raw vegan chef at the juice bar. That's how I became sort of identified with the label vegan. Because I'd already cut out like most animal products from my diet, but I didn't really commit to the word vegan until after working at the juice bar and that kind of thing. But when I first made Ed some raw desserts, that was kind of like an eye-opener for him. It was like, wow, like you can actually get rich, creamy textures through vegan that hadn't really been seen. I mean, like 10 years ago, vegan cheesecake was very exciting. These days, everyone's seen it. It's like, what's next kind of thing. But
it's like cauliflower wings.
Cauliflower wings, exciting were they, right? Beyond Meat burgers. Oh my God, it tastes just like real meat. But it's like, when's the innovations just keep coming hard and fast, and it's really exciting. So I do think that, chefs that move over to veganism, it's just a whole nother world to explore of ingredients. And a lot of vegan people say they didn't really like cooking until they became vegan, had to cook for themselves. And it does, it is quite exciting and not restrictive. I feel like it's abundant when you realize the properties that plants have and how many plants there are to use and different tastes and flavors. Like it's really exciting, much more exciting than just barbecuing some meat and doing a potato salad,
100%. I'm definitely in that camp. Before going vegan, I was, I wasn't really into cooking at all. Like scrambled egg on toast was probably about as far as it was going to go. And then everything else was either out of a packet or out of a restaurant, definitely veganism sort of has made me want to cook. I'm excited by it. I haven't got the skill, but God loves a try. I'll keep going. I'm fascinated by this call by Penguin about the book and that kind of 50 recipes. Can you make that 100? That kind of thing. Like that's kind of a crazy call to receive, I'd imagine, and maybe not one that you were expecting. Was that an instant yes? Because I think if it was in that position, my head would say, yes, this is great. This is good for business. We need to do this. And then there'd probably be fairly quickly after that first thought, but 100 recipes, a cookbook, like how? Like how is that? How does that work? So what was your kind of thought process when you were getting that call?
It was an email and I read it first and I actually didn't tell Ed about it for a while. I just opened the email and then just moved on because this email came. So we'd had the pandemic, we'd shut down for a bit and we're just doing BReD once a week, Ed and I, through a pre-order system with appointments. So before there were government guidelines on how to operate during the pandemic, I just set up 5-minute appointments with about 10 foot between me and the customer and would just basically run from the back of the bakery, put stuff on a table, run back. They'd come pick it up. I say, thank you, bye-bye. And then come and sanitize the table. Next order. It was horrible. And then throughout that horrible time, we lost basically our whole team. But we had to reopen with like a very skeleton team and it was really horrible and hard. But we ended up winning a small business award, and then got on some podcasts and some media exposure through this little award that we won. And then all of a sudden there was this email from Penguin saying they'd heard us on an interview. And I just remember thinking, how the hell have we got time for that? Like, we're trying to get this business back off the ground. We're working super hard. We haven't got any time, no people to help us. And I didn't mention it for a bit. And then after a couple of weeks, I said to Ed, Penguin want you to write a book, as if to say, like, this is absolutely
just drop that one in.
Trying to drop it in. Like, I'm not much of a reader. Like, I love cookbooks, but Penguin, like, everyone knows Penguin. Like, I've
heard of them.
I grew up on the books. Like, for us, it was like Puffin as like kids. It's like their kids edition. And like she said, Penguin, I'm just like, we have to do it.
We have to do it.
Not even like we don't have time. We don't have time. But I'm like, looks like I've got a second job. So yeah, it was pretty full on. And then you're like, there's so many unknowns. You're like, how much help are we going to have? Like, are we doing this all on our own? Turns out we are doing it all on our own. So,
yeah.
Get a photographer and off you go. You've got a year to write this book.
People seem to think that, like, you get given like recipe developers and like
food
stylists, and it's all just kind of like your name on the book, but there's a whole team of people doing it for you. It's not like that. Like, maybe it is when you're someone like Jamie Oliver or something. I don't know. But for us, as a newbie out of nowhere, it was like, yeah, here's your like author's allowance. You go pay for the photographer. You pay for all the food. You pay for all the props. You get the thing written. You get it shot and edited. But they have editors at the publishing house, but they send it back to you with like, it's like going to school and writing an essay and then getting it back with all the red lines all under, all the corrections.
With the red biro on it.
It's horrible.
And there was a lot.
And every time you think like, right, I kind of know what they've want now, and I've written it how they want. Like, there was this whole fiasco over measurements, because in North America, most home cooks and bakers apparently use cups. Like spoons to measure everything in a recipe. But bakers, like professional bakers, know that is not an accurate way to really do a recipe. The best thing is to have a digital scale, so you can get everything precise to like, 0.1 gram or whatever. So we really didn't want to write in cups. We wanted to have grams, and wrote in the book, like, please buy a scale if you're going to make these recipes. We can't guarantee that it would work as well with cups, because it's like one person could have a level cup of flour, another person's just going to put a whole heaped cup, and that could be 25 grams different, and then the whole thing could be, on or off the recipe. So we didn't want to use cups, but in North America, it's basically the standard. And Penguin said, ultimately, if you don't use cups, people will hate you, and
they just said you're doing it.
You have to use
There's
cups.
Certain things that they were just like,
that was a non-negotiable. Yeah. We had to use cups. So then it was like, okay, so we're using cups, but then do we use pounds and ounces, or like imperial or metric? And we wanted our book to appeal to everyone around the world. So I started off with like the cups, the grams, and the ounces. And so it was like ridiculous like amount of measurements for every recipe, and did all the recipes like this. And then they came back and said, this is a bit overwhelming. You've got a bit too much going on. Like, can you just use like ounces or grams? And so, okay, so I went back through all the recipes and had to delete all of the, like, I think we went for grams in the end.
We did to the cups as well. I think we just grabbed
and had to do cups, except for some of the very technical like bread recipes. You were just like, no way. And then they went and researched or checked in with another author at Penguin called Chad Robertson, who's written these phenomenal sourdough books called Tartine. And they were like, what's Chad doing? Oh, well, Chad's done it in grams. Okay, we'll let you do it in grams now. So it's like, okay, so I can take all the cups out of that one as well. And it was kind of frustrating that they wouldn't just trust us to do it our way. They had to get like Chad Robertson, the godfather of sourdough, to like, endorse that doing grams only was acceptable, because he's in California.
It was an experience. I mean, I got relatively the fun part, like developing making the products while Tash is at home, like doing all these conversions. Because that's the other thing. We just assumed they would do this.
They don't do it. You have to do it all.
Maybe
Right.
book 2 if this one goes well. So we need everyone to pre-order.
Pre-order this one. We can get book 2, and we can ask if you got a team.
If this one goes well, I imagine there'll be people. The next sourdough book somebody will be asking Ed and Natasha if what they did in their book, whether they used the measurements.
What a dream!
I'm sure. So, yeah, I'm sure it will be the case. That's awesome. So where do folks go about getting hold of the book?
They should be able to pre-order it through any of their bookstores. The easiest link that we found is if you go to Penguin, probably.
It would be penguin.co.uk if you're in the UK, or penguin.com if you're in the US, or penguin.ca if you're in Canada. So they have all the links, but you should just be able to Google like BReD, BReD, BReD book, and then it would come up. But a lot of people like to support their local bookstores, so you can go there and ask them to get it. Like in the UK, I know Waterstones have got it, and I'm sure there's lots of smaller independent stores that have it available.
The cool thing about the Penguin link is it says like shop local, so it's got the big ones at the top. So Amazon is on Amazon all over the world. But then in the Penguin link, it says shop local. So it'll actually just take you just enter in your postcode, and then it will take you to your local bookstore, cool. which is really cool.
That's very cool. I'm intrigued, like you had to come up with all these different recipes. I'm intrigued as to like, A, was there a favourite? And B, is there one that you are kind of glad to see the back of, and you're glad it's in the book and it's a great recipe, but if you didn't have to do it again, you wouldn't be that sad?
Oh, it's a good question. I haven't thought of that. Like I say that there's like recipes for beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Like a beginner recipe is like a really simple gluten-free orange and almond cake that you make in a food processor. Like blend the wet ingredients, add the dry, throw it in a pan, and it's really delicious, like Italian style cake. And then there's like the cinnamon buns, which Tash was talking about earlier, that we're known for. That because they're sourdough and there's a feeding of the sourdough starter, it's like takes 3 days to make. So you're going to build up to that sort of recipe, or like someone that's got a starter already. But at the same point, there is at the beginning of the book how to make your own sourdough starter. So there's a lot of sort of process and guidance and tips in there. Favorite recipe? I don't know. There's some really cool like bread recipes in there that I like. I really enjoyed the donuts. Like we can't make donuts at the bakery because we don't have like a extraction system, so it can't suck out. Like we've got like a heating cooling that's specific for the bread. So I love making donuts, but I think if we made them at the bakery, I'd be like, I don't know, 500 pounds or something.
And the bakery would stink.
massive guy. But there's something about a nice jam donut just like takes me back to when I was a kid, buying 10 from Tesco or something.
British childhood, right there. Yeah.
There's like the whole chapter on like sourdough breads, and then small breads, like flatbreads and buns and that kind of thing. And then there's sweet breads like babka, cinnamon buns, and then there's like festive recipes, so hot cross buns, mince pies, that type of thing. And then there's like a zero waste section, because when you make sourdough, you have to feed your starter. And when you follow a recipe, you might not need to use all of that starter in the recipe. So you make a leaven and then you feed your sourdough starter, but there might be some discard, like some leaven that you don't need. So you might use that in another recipe. So you could make like a pancake with it, or waffles or something like that. So we have a bunch of discard recipes, but also, like Ed said, if you boil chickpeas, you could use the chickpeas to make hummus, because we have an accompaniment chapter as well. So we've got a hummus in there, but we also became quite known for this very cult followed cookie called the hummus cookie, which we think is like the most vegan thing ever, because vegans like hummus. But
it doesn't have garlic in it. But it has everything.
Ingredients of hummus, so like olive
I was wondering.
chickpeas, lemon, all the sesame, all of those like ingredients we put into a cookie, and it's gluten free as well. So that gets extra bonus points because you'd be surprised how many gluten free people come to a sourdough bakery. Like we actually have our logo is like a slice of bread with wheat inside. So I want to make it really clear that we have wheat in our kitchen, and still probably 50% of the people that come in say, "What's gluten free?" I'm like, we do make some gluten-free things. We're not like anti the gluten-free people, especially the celiacs. God bless them. They don't choose to be celiac. So we have compassion for them. We try to cater to them. And so we do have like the hummus cookie is like.
Did you say that's your favorite?
It's one of my favorites. It's so unusual. And everyone's always like, hummus cookie. Then they eat it and they're like, oh my God. And we always get lots of people asking for that. So that recipe's in there. Everyone needs to go and make it and see what a hummus cookie is and enjoy that. That's one of my favorites. But I mean, I'm a sucker for chocolate miso babka as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And there's some...
it's dangerous. Like our friends did pretty well when we were doing the cookbook because obviously... you have to make once the recipe or twice the recipe to make sure, if anything goes wrong and you can bake another batch or whatever, because the photographer's there only for a certain amount of time. So there was kind of time restraints in that point. And I wanted to shoot as much of it. We shot it all at the bakery, but on like a sunny day. So I wanted to do as much of it with natural light. So she did pretty well, but our friends, we were just like, we can't eat all this food. We're going to be huge. So we give extras to like the hospital or to friends or to the food bank or something like that. So we were trying to we always try and be really responsible with any extra food that we have. And also it's good to get, feedback. They're like, oh, it's a bit too sweet or anything like that. So.
And there's some big cakes and desserts in there, like a big lemon meringue tart where Ed's blowtorched all the like aquafaba meringue on the top. That's really good.
It was a fun experience. When you look back at it at the time, sometimes it's like we had no free time at all. Like, it was pretty intense.
Well, you mentioned book 2, so it can't have been that bad.
Yeah,
well, Penguin have mentioned book 2 to us.
I might be getting ahead of myself.
Oh, really?
Like I said, let's see. It comes out, so you can pre-order it now. Comes out November the 7th. So it makes a really good, Christmas gift. It's a really good time. It was always planned to come out. More people bake throughout the autumn and winter. So hopefully it does really well. We're hoping that it's going to sort of, bring something new to the vegan cookbook scene, and that it's a book for everyone. You don't have to be vegan. You can be plant curious. You can just be, a lot of people have got a friend or kids' birthday parties that they want to make something for. We tried to make a book that was sort of bread and cake. There's a bunch of stuff in there. It's not just a boring just bread book. And I don't have a sourdough starter, so I can't make anything. There's about 50 or 60 recipes that you don't need a sourdough starter for.
Well, I think the book's quite unique because there's a lot of books on the market that are focused on bread, like Ed said, sourdough. There's a lot of books that are focused on vegan cooking. In fact, I would say the market in the last few years has become saturated with vegan cookbooks of all different styles, which is fantastic. But not a whole lot is out there on vegan baking. I mean, I know you've had Freya Cox on your show and met her at the Veg Fest back in November. We saw you there too on the panel. And she's written a vegan baking book, which is great. She was on the vegan, she was rocking the vegan thing on that baking show, the Great British Bake Off, I think.
Great British Bake Off, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's great. She is doing wonderful things, but her book is definitely catered to people to make it very accessible and simple. And ours has a lot more, some recipes that are simple and some that are more advanced and sort of show the complexity and the technicality and the professional side of what vegan baking can be as well. So I think, and obviously we've got sourdough in there. So there's nothing really out there, I don't think, that's vegan baking and sourdough combined. And so we've tried to bring this to the world.
I love that. I love that idea of taking people on a journey. You know, here's some basic stuff to get you going, and then you're kind of working through the book, sort of almost a bit of a companion with you over the years of your baking journey. I love that concept.
I was just building, like you said, it's building trust. You know, you start whenever I have cookbooks, you know, sometimes they don't work. And you're like, has this recipe even been tested? So, I mean, a lot of them have been tested like hundreds of times because they're on at the bakery. So we wanted to build that confidence with the reader.
Yeah, I love that. And as a dad of a little vegan who's 5 and loves to get in the kitchen and have a go, I love the idea of being able to introduce him to some simple stuff, and as he gets older, like, you know, introduce some more difficult concepts, because he's really kind of quite passionate about it. This summer holiday particularly, he's decided he's a chef, so I'm loving it.
That's really cool. I think probably that's about the same age I started, like baking little cakes and stuff like that with my mum and taking them to school or, you know, to friends' birthdays. I think it's like it sticks with you. So that's taking me right back to my mum's got pictures of me like standing like I just wanted to mix everything. I'm like, just give me a bowl or a pan and I'll just stir it.
That's him. That is him totally. He's got a little step ladder, the permanent residence in our kitchen.
Amazing.
And he's constantly on the step ladder stirring something or mixing something or weighing things out with his curious measurements.
Yeah,
it's so cute.
He would have probably liked the 10 measurements in your original draft of the book.
Yes, that's my kind of.
One of them might have been right.
Yeah.
I love it. Look, Ed, Natasha, it's been awesome chatting with you. I'm going to put links in the show notes so everyone can pre-order the book. I'll encourage them to. I certainly will be from my local bookshop, and can't wait till it comes out. I'll look forward to that day in November.
Amazing. Thank you, Jim. It's been really fun.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And if you want to follow along with us on eds_BReD on Instagram, eds_BReD, and you can see all of our recipes that we'll be sharing from the book and all of the events that we're putting on. We're hopefully going to be putting one on actually in the UK in November. So you'll be getting an invite to that as well, Jim.
Awesome.
So stay tuned.
Cannot wait. Yeah, definitely. I'll be following along. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Cheers.